Ernest Hemingway famously wrote, "The world breaks everyone, and afterwards, some are stronger in the broken places." To paraphrase the wonderful Jewish poet, singer-songwriter Leonard Cohen, there is no perfection in anything in this world. There are no perfect people. There is a crack in everything. But that is precisely how the light gets in. My friends, one of the great gifts that God bestowed upon humanity is the gift of recovery, reconciliation, of healing, of being able to start again, and of second chances. The theme of this week's Torah portion, Parshat Tissa, of which the central narrative is the most colossal failure of our ancient ancestors in the desert. The story of the golden calf, the great spiritual and indeed even moral and ethical failing of our ancestors so soon after the great revelation and inspiration of Mount Sinai of the Ten Commandments and the Torah, while awaiting Moses to return and descend from Mount Sinai with the cherished tablets, they debased themselves, betraying the covenant they had just sworn themselves to upkeep, worshiping idolatry, and worse, morally and ethically debasing themselves with bloodshed and other crimes. And yet, the story that emerges from this parsha is not just the story of failure, but the story of recovery. After the Almighty tells Moshe that perhaps we need to do a rewrite to reconsider whether this covenant can be saved, whether there's anything salvageable with this nation, and perhaps we need to start all over again, Moses, with a nation emerging from you. And Moshe says, not so fast. If the Torah that you have just given me is incapable of allowing for recovery, even from this is not a Torah that I wish to be associated with and even communicate to your nation. Remove me from it. One of the great connections and metaphors that I am always drawn to in the Torah is not the stories of failure, it's the stories of recovery. Many people are attracted to the tales and the stories of the Torah and the Bible for many different reasons. For me personally, I'm always looking not to the scene of the crime, but to the following chapter, the scene of penance. How do these people recover? Because you see, what is unique to me about Torah literature versus all other forms of ancient religious literature, and perhaps all literature, is that the Torah never glosses over or hides the shameful iniquities of the central characters of whom it lifts on the pedestal. The Torah tells us their great failings, but as a lesson, only in order to teach us the great recovery. Everybody falls down. What is inspiring to read is about how they get up afterwards. I'm reminded of this from the late Chief Rabbi of the British Commonwealth, Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha, who I once heard him relate that how powerfully this lesson resonated with him from an episode that happened when he went for a physical to his physician. He's at his yearly physical, and the doctor asked him to get on a treadmill, and he put a number of devices to monitor his pulse and his heart rate. And as Rabbi Sacks is working up a sweat, a little quicker, a little faster on the treadmill, he turns to the doctor and he says, "Are you measuring my stamina, perhaps? Are you measuring how long and how fast I can go?" And the doctor turns to him and he says, no. What I am actually doing is waiting for when you will get off to measure your recovery. I want to see how quickly your pulse and your heart rate can return to its original state. I am more interested in your recovery than in your run. And this, he taught him a profound idea about all of biblical narrative, that what we need to be looking for inspiration is not only in the story itself, but the aftermath. The great leaders of Jewish history are great not only for the wonderful, brilliant things that they accomplished in life. It's for the eternal legacy of how they bounced back from tremendous challenges. Indeed, in the portion of Vayechi at the very end, when Jacob blesses his children, and he chooses Judah to have the most extraordinary blessing, he gives him the gift of sovereignty, of monarchy of the Jewish people for all time. What does Jacob tell Judah? He says, Miterev beni alita. Judah, you descended into the depths of depravity in your association with the sale of your brother Joseph. But alita, yes, you failed, but you recovered. At the moment of truth, you never let your past failings define you. You always knew that in one moment, I can transform the past by what I do today, what I am doing right now. This idea is found throughout the biblical narrative of Tanakh. King David HaMelech, is defined by his response to his shortcomings. Amongst all the great things that he accomplished, what holds him high on the pedestal in Jewish history forever, what makes him the eternal king, is that he never let his past indiscretions define his present and his future. He was never too ashamed to take accountability. He was never too prideful to say that I can't go forward because of what happened in the past. The portion of Tissa is unique in that in the Hebrew word, the name of the Parsha defines two paradoxical concepts. The beginning begins Tissa, which means to raise up. Literally, the words of our Parsha mean, when you shall raise up the Jewish people, God tells Moses. But that same word Tissa is found later in the same Parsha, in the aftermath of the sin of the golden calf, when God is contemplating the destruction, God forbid, of the entire Jewish people. Moshe says that if you will not Tissa chatatam, if you will not forgive the Jewish people, erase me from your Torah. The same word, the word Tissa, meaning to raise up, to lift up, spiritually, and the word Tissa means to forgive. Because the greatest lifting up, the Torah is teaching us, the greatest elevation that a human being can achieve is the elevation that we go through after we fall down. When we get up again, when we have the courage to continue on, when we can look back and realize that we are defined not by how we fell and how many times we fall, but how we get up afterwards. That the gift that God gave us, the gift of healing, the gift of wholesomeness, the gift of reconciliation, is not only true between us and the Almighty, it's between us and our fellow, it's also between us and ourselves even more. That we need to believe in ourselves just as much as God believes in us. That we emerge from the story of Parshat Tissa with a second set of tablets. A second set of tablets that were even more glorious than the first. We emerge in life, when we overcome our brokenness, to be even more wholesome and more complete than before. Because, as I mentioned, there is no such thing as wholesomeness without encountering brokenness. There is never deep light. There is never profound light without the depth of darkness first. And so the blessing of this week's Parsha, the blessing of the Torah, and at the urging and the inspiration of all the greats of our history who beckon to us from the pages of the Tanakh, and telling us that the stories that God reveals to us through their lives is that God uses them as the instruments to inspire us. That we should never stop believing in ourselves. That no matter how low we fall, we can climb up even higher afterwards. No matter how many times we fail, there is light on the horizon just on the other side. Ki Tissa, God is waiting to raise us up. He is waiting to forgive us. When we forgive ourselves, when we are willing to forgive our fellow, then God is going to rise us up, raise us and show us from the vantage point that every act of forgiveness, every act of Tissa is an act of supreme elevation, of supreme confidence and wholesomeness and renewal. May God bless us to hone in and focus on recovery, not be so focused on where we are now and what happened in our past, but where we can be, what we can achieve in the future. Never let our past define our present and the future. Indeed, this is true individually and nationally. God never allows the history of the Jewish people in the past to stymie and stifle the growth and the potential of the Jewish people in the future. Ki Tissa, may we all be forgiven. May we forgive ourselves and each other. May God then show us the glorious Ki Tissa, the raising up of all of us to our greatest and fullest potential, and to realize that none of us in the past and in the present could have ever achieved anything without going through the valleys of the shadow of death before we will encounter the great and endless light of the Ein Sof that emerges on the other side. Shabbat Shalom.